So far, we've looked at the metrics that can help us evaluate the results of our campaign. That's an important part of understanding whether our campaigns were effective. But even if our campaign is achieving the results we would like to see, in order to get a better picture of how successful our campaign really was, we should also be looking at the cost of our advertising. So instead of asking, was my campaign successful, we should ask, did my campaign pay off? This will help us determine whether we maximized our marketing budget or if we can find ways to improve our outcomes while lowering our costs. We'll start by looking at our return on ad spend, or ROAS. ROAS is simply a way to find out how much revenue you made from your advertising versus what you spend on it. The calculation for ROAS is revenue made from the ads divided by the advertising costs of those ads. For example, if you spent $1 on advertising and made $10 off of that advertising, your ROAS is 10, or can be expressed as 10-1, or 10 times. So this advertising made 10 times what we spend on it, which would be pretty good. But if you spent $1 on advertising and made $2 off of that advertising, your ROAS would only be 2. This number might tell you that there's room for improvement. That's why simply calculating results without costs can only get you so far. Why is it important to know ROAS? Well, it's a good indicator of knowing the effectiveness of your campaign. And not only if it's profitable, but how profitable. And you never want your ROAS to break even at 1-to-1 or be lower than 1, because that means you're losing money on your campaign. Depending on the objectives and results you want for your campaign, you may have a target ROAS based on past experience, or you may be okay with the ROAS being small in certain situations. ROAS can also help you decide if it would be cost-effective to repeat that campaign or make adjustments as needed. Let's look at a more detailed example of ROAS from our flower shop, Calla and Ivy. Imra ran a campaign advertising seasonal fall leaf wreaths, selling for $50 a piece. She spent $250 on the campaign and, as a result, sold 15 wreaths. 15 wreaths at $50 a piece would have a result of $750 total revenue. So the ROAS here would be 750 divided by 250, or a result of 3. This means that Calla and Ivy made 3 times what it spent on advertising. Now, where do you find the data for this calculation? Knowing exactly how much you spent on an ad campaign sounds like an easy number to track, but how would you know which sales came from that specific ad campaign and not from either another campaign or organic traffic? That's where Pixel comes into play, which we learned about in our last course. Setting up the pixel on your site allows Ads Manager to track sales that result directly from your ad campaign. This makes calculating ROAS incredibly easy. Let's look at another example that's a little less straightforward from DCB Cleaning. Since they're a cleaning services company that works on long-term contracts, it takes them longer to close a sale, and it's not as defined as a one-to-one wreath sale. The owner, James, has been running campaigns on Facebook focusing on lead generation. So far, he's spent $2,000 on his campaign and generated 100 leads. So would the ROAS be 100 divided by 2,000? Well, not quite, because each variable needs to be a value, in this case a dollar value. Not every one of those leads will result in a sale. But James knows that each lead that purchases services will result in $2,000 worth of revenue. If 10% of leads typically convert, James will get 10 customers from that 100, which will result in $20,000 total revenue. So the ROAS would be $20,000 over the $2,000 spent on the ads. So the ROAS for this campaign would be 10, or 10 times the revenue he spent. As we saw in the previous example, sometimes advertising can be directly related to revenue realized later on. Calculating ROAS may include ad spend from different parts of the customer journey or funnel. For instance, spending on campaigns that generate awareness. different campaigns that generate engagement or consideration, and campaigns that get a customer to the final sale. Let's look at an example that illustrates this concept of advertising to all parts of the funnel. When Carlos launched the website for Inu and Neko, he was focused on generating sales around his pet accessories and food. So Carlos created campaigns focused on different aspects of the customer journey. Awareness campaigns that let people know about their brand. Consideration campaigns that focused on driving traffic to the website and increased engagement, and conversion campaigns that focused on selling their products. The group of campaigns ran concurrently for over 3 months and generated 1 million impressions, 8,000 website visits, and 1,000 purchases, resulting in $30,000. Inno and Neko spent 7,000 on the awareness campaigns, 6,000 on the consideration campaigns, and 6,000 on the conversion campaigns, for a total of 19,000. What would Inno and Neko's ROAS be? It would be the 30,000 of revenue made divided by the 19,000 spent on the ad campaigns, for a ROAS of 1.58. Before we go any further, you may be asking, is ROAS the same as return on investment or ROI? Well, no, it's not. ROAS focuses on just the revenue made, generated from a specific ad campaign, and is most helpful when evaluating your advertising budget and effectiveness. ROI looks at bigger picture spending and profit and takes into account the total costs related to advertising and sales, like how much the product took to make. There are times, though, when you'd need to look at ROI instead of ROAS to give you a better picture of your advertising effectiveness. For instance, in the previous example from Inno and Neko, we would look at investments in the multiple campaigns as well as time and resources and the cost of the goods sold to get a bigger picture of how advertising affected the bottom line. For example, if we want to calculate the ROI of Kala and Ivy's fall leaf wreaths, we wouldn't just look at the sales, but how much it cost Imra to make the wreaths, including supplies and time. We previously calculated the ROAS at 3, which was a revenue of 750 over 250 in ad spend. But what if it took Imra $500 to make the wreaths? Her profit from the wreaths would actually only be $250. So if she spent $250 on advertising, she wouldn't have actually made any profit from the wreaths. ROI is a metric that takes all of the money you spend into account. So it doesn't only look at the advertising dollars you spend and the revenue you get in return. Instead, it looks at all the money you spend and the net return on your profit. The formula for ROI, or return on investment, is revenue minus investments divided by those investments. And investments include the money you spend on advertising and sales, as well as the cost of goods sold. So you basically look at the revenue minus all the money you spent to generate that revenue, and you divide that again by all the money you spent. Let's look again at our example from Kala and Ivy. The revenue Imra generated was $750, and to get there, she made a total investment of $500 plus $250, or $750. So in this case, her return on investment is 0. Now, it is possible that the $500 Imra spent on creating the wreaths partially went into getting a first prototype created. So if Imra sold more wreaths, the cost would go up, but maybe not with as much. Let's say that Imra sells 200 wreaths and it costs her $800 to create them. Imra is also able to optimize her campaigns a bit, and she spent only $2,000 on advertising. Let's take a look at what the ROI looks like now. Every wreath sells at $50, and 200 wreaths were sold for a total revenue of $10,000. Imra invested $800 to create the wreaths, and she also invested $2,000 in advertising. So her total investment to generate the $10,000 in revenue was $2,800. That means her ROI is 10,000 minus 2,800 divided by 2,800, which equals 2.57. Or in other words, for every dollar Imra spends on selling reeds, she gets $2.57 in return. That's a good ROI, so Imra can feel confident to keep selling reeds at this cost. As you can see from this Scala and Ivy example, it's important to look at other measurements along with ROAS, because knowing that you had a ROAS of 5 may mean nothing to you unless you know how to evaluate what 5 means to you. Now that you've evaluated your ROAS, how can you go about improving it? Because ROAS is based around just two variables, there are only really two actions you can take to improve the ratio. Either lower the cost of your ads to get a better return, or increase the revenue you generate. Ideally, you could do both. You can do this by looking to see if you're wasting time targeting the wrong audience, or by not using the right ad placement. You can also have a bidding strategy that doesn't work for what you're trying to accomplish. You can also look at ways to simplify the buying experience once the customer gets to your website. In other words, make it easier for the user to take the action you want them to take.